So as we dive into the first pillar or the first cornerstone, leadership, um, this is all about spending time defining the why. I get lots of calls from school systems around the country, asking about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And the first question I ask them is, why do you want to do this? And it's amazing to find out their answer usually is all about how they want to do it. Very little is spent on why. And so when we think about this leadership strand, the very first thing that you have to do as an organization is define your why. And the why has to be all about the students and the environment that they're living in as young adults and the environment that they'll continue to live in as adults. So we sit back and we think about the why, and you have to spend time with all of your stakeholders defining this why. You have to spend time with the school board, with your campuses, with your teachers, and more importantly, with your community. They have to understand why you're doing this. Once you spend adequate time in defining the why, then you can reach out and you can start talking about how we're going to accomplish what we've been talking about. And that really begins to lay the foundation for what you're going to do. And for HISD, and I would say it's very similar for all of the school systems that are seeing success. It's all about philosophically changing the instructional delivery model, right? We're changing that traditional foundation of typical instruction, and now it looks completely different. Once you spend the time defining the why and the how, then you can really start to move forward. So as we think about defining the why, what does that accomplish? That gets understanding in your community, with your principals, with your teachers, with your administration. They understand what you're doing. And that's when you start really doing a lot of communication, right? And so there's a big difference in communication and in marketing. As we move to the how, right, now you're looking for acceptance. Now you want people to be excited about that. And that's when you really have to put your marketing hat on. And marketing is completely different than communication, right? This is where you want to build enthusiasm. You want to build the advocacy for this. You want to build that base so that when the first bump does occur, and they will occur, they've occurred in every school system out there, even the most successful ones, they've had bumps in the road. But when they do occur, if you spend adequate time defining why you want to do this and how you're going to do this, you will have the support base that will say, this is so important, we want you to push through this. If you don't have the support base, then what typically happens, and you see it all across the country, is you have a push to abandon what you're doing, right? This is too scary, you don't know what you're doing, and we need to get out. So the defining the why and the how are critical. When you're defining why, you communicate. When you define the how, you start to market. This is also an opportunity for you really to sit back as a school system and look at your policies and procedures, right? Because this is an element that often gets thought of very far along in the process, and it typically will slow you down if you don't think about it early on. So as you're early in the defining the why and the how, there needs to be sidebar conversations looking at your responsible use guidelines, looking at your student code of conduct, looking at SIPA and COPPA, all of these policies out there. How are you going to do parent notification? All of this stuff needs to be, a sidebar element to what you're doing in defining the how and the why. And the last part of this is, as you're defining what you want to do and why you want to do it, you have to have a sustainability plan built, right? So before you ever step out to begin talking to your community about why you want to do this, you have had to have thought through how you're going to fund this. And your funding needs to be thought through to sustain it beyond the initial rollout. I've said this time and time again, one-to-one isn't anything new. One-to-one has been around for decades. The reason one-to-one never caught on, there's two reasons. One, financially making this sustainable has always been a huge difficulty. And the second reason is because it was all about the device. The thought was, give the device to the kids and the magic happens. What's different in a digital transformation initiative is the device has very little to do. It's an enabler. So what does that mean? That you have to have funding that will sustain the hardware. You have to have funding that will sustain all the digital transformation tools. You have to have funding for the repositories, where your digital content is going to go. So you really need to take a step back and look at it holistically, not just from the device perspective, but from what are all the elements of my digital transformation. Now, the really interesting piece of this is for HISD, we were able to do our Power Up initiative, and we were able to fund it without adding any dollars to any additional dollars to our general fund. And the reason we were able to do that is if you think about digital transformation and philosophically changing how we're doing instruction, that means that you are by default, you're going to stop doing some things. So if you're going to stop doing some things in that traditional instructional delivery, that will free dollars up that then can be reallocated. You'll free resources up because you're going to repurpose some people in what they currently did in the traditional instructional model. Now here's what their role will be in the digital transformation model. So funding isn't all about finding new money. Funding is about stopping and abandoning certain things and repurposing. So those are kind of the elements of leadership: define the why, define the how, communicate, market your policies, and then you also look at your funding.